I came home days earlier than planned, still in my work clothes, still thinking about dinner and rest. One unfamiliar car in my spot stopped me cold. Inside, I heard my husband laughing, whispering words that weren't meant for me. I didn't step in. I didn't react. I made a quiet choice instead, one that would turn their confidence into panic and change everything that followed. Before I tell you exactly what I heard and what I chose to do next, stay with me, support this story, and let me know where you're listening from, because what followed wasn't an accident. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling. The sudden downpour at dusk had soaked the city into a gray blur. Raindrops slid down the Uber window in crooked paths, mirroring the tension coiled in my chest. I watched streetlights smear into gold lines as we turned toward the high-rise where I lived. Despite the exhaustion pressing behind my eyes, a small bubble of happiness rose inside me. I'd finished my business trip early. The contract everyone said was impossible was finally signed. 10 years of relentless work, late nights, missed holidays. This one deal alone had carried the weight of all of it. I imagined cooking dinner that night, real food instead of takeout. I imagined my husband's face when he saw me standing in the doorway a day sooner than planned. That thought carried me through the lobby, through the quiet hum of the elevator, through the familiar descent into the parking garage. That was when my steps stopped. Spot B15. My spot. The space I'd paid a small fortune for because convenience mattered when you lived your life on deadlines. It wasn't empty. A cherry red sports car sat there instead, polished, loud, unmistakable. I stared at the license plate, my stomach tightening as recognition hit. The car belonged to my sister-in-law. My mind scrambled for explanations. It was a weekday. Her husband was supposed to be out of town. She should have been at work or at her parents' place. Why would she be here? Why now? I forced myself to breathe, dragged my suitcase toward the elevator, and told myself not to jump to conclusions. People borrowed parking spots all the time. Maybe she needed help with something. Maybe she just stopped by. The elevator doors closed, sealing me inside with my reflection. A woman in her mid-30s stared back. Sharp suit, neat hair, eyes dulled by years of pressure. I looked successful, powerful even. Yet the lines beneath my eyes told a different story. I wondered, briefly, if my husband still saw me as a partner or just as the steady engine that kept his life running. The hallway on our floor was silent. No television noise leaked from neighboring apartments. No voices. I moved quietly, not because I planned to sneak, but because something inside me had already shifted into caution. I didn't ring the bell. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. The door opened with a soft click. The apartment was dim. Curtains drawn. The familiar scent of lavender hung in the air. But beneath it was something else. A sweeter, heavier perfume. Not mine. I kicked off my heels, heart pounding, and took one step forward. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the home I'd built. A woman's breath, uneven and broken. A man's voice, low and strained. The rhythm of it was unmistakable, intimate, wrong. My body froze. For a moment, I couldn't even feel my hands. The world narrowed to that single sound drifting from the bedroom, turning my blood cold and hot at the same time. I moved without thinking, stopping just short of the door. It was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the crack. On my bed, on sheets I had changed before leaving, two bodies were tangled together. The woman's hair fell across her face as she laughed softly, a sound I'd heard 100 times at family dinners. My sister-in-law, the woman I'd defended, the woman I'd trusted. My husband's voice followed, careless and cruel, words dripping with desire and contempt. He said things that burned deeper than the sight itself. Things about me, about my body, about how I'd changed, about how I was useful but no longer wanted. Something broke inside me then, but it wasn't what they would have expected. I didn't scream. I didn't rush forward. I didn't collapse. I lifted my phone. 2 minutes. That's all I needed. 2 minutes to capture the truth exactly as it was. My hand shook, but I kept the frame steady. I recorded the sounds, the faces, the words meant to destroy me if I ever heard them. When I was done, I stepped back as quietly as I'd come. I closed the door. I picked up my suitcase. I left the apartment like a stranger, carrying something far heavier than luggage. I don't remember the ride across town, only the feeling of my body trembling uncontrollably, as if reacting for the tears I refused to shed. I went straight to the one person I trusted without question, my closest friend, a woman who knew the law as well as she knew me. When I showed her the video, she didn't gasp. She didn't soften her voice. She looked me in the eye and told me the truth I needed to hear. If you explode now, you lose. If you confront them now, they control the story. If you stay calm, they destroy themselves. That was the night I stopped being just a wife who'd been betrayed and became a woman who would decide how this ended. And that was only the beginning. I stayed at my friend's place that night, lying awake on her couch while the city breathed around us. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. The bed I had chosen, the sheets I had smoothed with care, my life reduced to a careless mess of limbs and lies. But beneath the pain, something colder and steadier began to form. By the time dawn crept through the windows, I wasn't crying anymore. I was thinking. The first thing I did was shower, not to wash away what I'd seen. I knew that would linger no matter how much water passed over my skin, but to clear my head. Under the spray, I repeated a single truth until it settled into my bones. Panic would only help them. Calm would protect me. When I came out wrapped in a towel, my friend was already at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a legal pad. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew better. She slid the pad toward me. Timeline, she said. We build one. Dates. Trips. Money. Every detail. We don't guess, we prove. So that's what we did. Hour by hour, I reconstructed my life from the outside in. Business trips. Late nights. Excuses that had once sounded reasonable, now lined up into a pattern so obvious it made my stomach turn. Each time I traveled, something else had filled the space I left behind. Each time I wired money to our joint account, it disappeared faster than it should have. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared finances. I had trusted him with day-to-day management because I'd been too busy running companies, negotiating contracts, carrying the weight of us both. That trust had been expensive. There it was, transfer after transfer. Small enough not to trigger alarms at first. Then larger ones. Jewelry purchases, boutique hotels, ride services that didn't match his supposed work hours. I didn't feel shock anymore, just a grim confirmation. My life hadn't imploded overnight. It had been quietly dismantled for months. By noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. Flight delayed? Didn't hear from you last night. Everything okay? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Long day. Exhausted. I'll be back tomorrow like planned. My fingers didn't shake when I typed it. That surprised me. The woman who sent that message was not the woman who had stood frozen in her own hallway the night before. She was someone else already. That evening I went home. I didn't rush. I didn't storm in. I entered like someone returning exactly when expected. I made noise with my keys. I called out his name. I played my part. He emerged from the bedroom in practiced comfort, a smile already prepared. He hugged me, asked about my trip, commented on how tired I looked. I nodded in the right places, offered vague answers, leaned into the version of myself he believed he still controlled. But my eyes noticed everything. The windows open despite the cold. The air freshener sprayed too heavily. The bed dressed in different sheets than the ones I'd left behind. The faint trace of that perfume, still clinging to the room like a confession that refused to fade. I said nothing. That night, I lay beside him, my body angled away. When he reached for me, I murmured something about jet lag and stress. He accepted it easily. Too easily. Guilt had made him cautious, not considerate. I waited. At 2 in the morning, his breathing deepened. His phone lay on the nightstand. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if each motion were rehearsed. I took his hand and pressed his thumb to the screen. It unlocked without protest. His messages were clean. Too clean. No careless texts. No obvious trails. That told me everything I needed to know. Men who believe they're clever always hide things in plain sight. It took me less than a minute to find it, a secure app disguised as a work tool. I tried one password, then another. Finally, I entered her birthday. The screen opened. What followed was an avalanche. Photos, messages, voice notes, promises, complaints about me disguised as jokes, plans that stretched into the future as if I were already erased, transfers labeled with private meanings that made my skin crawl, money I'd earned paying for a life I hadn't agreed to. I documented everything, every file, every date, every transaction. When I finished, I returned the phone exactly as I'd found it. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until morning, feeling something inside me go very still. Over the next few days, I became invisible in the best way possible. I cooked. I worked. I smiled. I listened. I asked gentle questions and watched his reactions with a detached focus I usually reserved for negotiations. Each flinch, each hesitation, each lie layered awkwardly over the last. Then I widened the circle. A private investigator came highly recommended. I hired him quietly, efficiently, without drama. I didn't ask him to confirm what I already knew. I asked him to document it. He did. Lunch meetings, short stays, cash exchanges, the careful choreography of two people who believed they were untouchable. Seeing the photos hurt, but they also hardened me. This wasn't weakness anymore. It was evidence. While that unfolded, I shifted my own position. I moved money, legally, carefully. I separated accounts under the guise of tax planning. I consulted accountants under confidentiality agreements. I reviewed documents I'd once signed without question, and that's when I found the real danger. Loans I hadn't approved, assets leveraged without my knowledge, my signature placed where my consent had never been given. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, structural. He hadn't just shared my bed. He'd gambled with my future. The realization didn't send me spiraling. It clarified everything. This wasn't a marriage problem. It was a liability. The turning point came at a family gathering, a casual lunch that should have been harmless. I watched her closely then, the way she avoided my eyes, the way he overcompensated, laughing too loudly, speaking too much. I asked one innocent question about a necklace she wore. She froze. He dropped his fork. No one else noticed, but I did. That was when I knew they were already cracking. Fear had crept in, and fear, when handled correctly, does more damage than anger ever could. That night, lying in bed beside the man who believed he was still ahead of me, I made my decision. I would not confront him in private. I would not beg for truth. I would not scream or cry or demand explanations. I would let the truth surface where it hurt the most, under light, under scrutiny, where lies collapse under their own weight. And I would be ready when it did. I woke before dawn every day, not because I couldn't sleep, though that was still true, but because my mind worked best in the quiet hours before the world woke up. I used those hours to prepare, not to heal. Healing could wait. What mattered now was control. At breakfast, my husband played the role of the attentive partner with almost comic precision. He asked if I wanted eggs or toast, if my meetings were stressful, if I was feeling better after the trip. Each question sounded caring. None of it was real. I answered lightly, never too much, never too little. I had learned in business that the person who speaks less usually knows more. And I knew everything. The investigators' updates arrived daily. Time-stamped photos, entry logs, receipts, patterns. What struck me most wasn't the intimacy between them. it was the carelessness. They truly believed I was blind. That belief was their greatest weakness. I began laying groundwork, quietly, the way foundations are poured before anyone realizes a building is going up. First, I scheduled meetings with my financial advisors, under the excuse of long-term planning, retirement restructuring, asset protection, tax optimization, all legitimate, all necessary, and all, conveniently, moved critical leverage out of reach. Then I met with a lawyer who specialized not in divorce drama, but in complex financial disentanglement, the kind that doesn't rely on shouting matches or courtroom theatrics, the kind that ends with one party walking away stunned, trying to understand where the ground disappeared. She didn't ask why. She just reviewed the evidence and nodded slowly. "You've been very patient," she said. "That's rare." "I've been underestimated," I replied. That night, my husband came home late. Too late for the excuse he'd already prepared. I noticed the faint mark on his collarbone when he changed for bed. He noticed me noticing. "You okay?" he asked casually. "Just tired," I said and turned off the light. I felt him relax beside me. He thought the moment had passed. It hadn't even begun. A week later, the first crack widened. At a family dinner, conversation drifted to money. Harmless on the surface. Someone joked about rising costs. Someone else complained about investments. I stayed quiet until prompted. "You're good with finances," someone said. "You always have been." I smiled. "I've learned to be careful." My husband stiffened just slightly, enough for me to notice. Later that night, he asked questions that sounded innocent but weren't. "Did you move money recently?" "No," I said easily. "Why?" "Just curious." I watched him lie awake long after he thought I was asleep. Fear was working its way in. Meanwhile, she began unraveling. Her messages grew erratic. The investigator noted changes in behavior. Shorter meetings, longer arguments, visible distress. She was pushing him for reassurance, for promises, for protection, and he was pulling away. That's what men like him do when consequences start to take shape. Desire fades. Self-preservation takes over. I decided it was time to apply pressure. Not directly. Socially. At a company event, one where spouses were expected, I played my role flawlessly. Elegant. Composed. Supportive. I spoke warmly about my husband's work, his dedication, his long hours. People listened. And they remembered. Later, in quiet corners, I let small concerns slip. Nothing accusatory, just worry. I hope stress isn't getting to him. He's been sleeping poorly. Sometimes I wonder if he's taking on too much alone. Concern spreads faster than gossip, and it carries less risk. Within days, whispers replaced assumptions. Questions replaced certainty. He came home agitated one evening, pacing, loosening his tie like it was choking him. "People at work are saying strange things," he muttered. "About what?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "Nothing. Just rumors." I touched his arm. He flinched. That told me everything. The next phase required patience and precision. I waited for her to make a mistake. She did. It happened at another family gathering, one she hadn't planned to attend but felt compelled to. She looked tired, pale, defensive. When someone congratulated her on something trivial, she overreacted. Her emotions spilled out sideways. And then she said it, a detail she shouldn't have known, a plan she wasn't supposed to be aware of. The room went quiet, not dramatically, not obviously, but just enough. Eyes met. Confusion flickered. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." I smiled. The trap was closing, and they were walking into it themselves. I stopped reacting. I stopped questioning. I stopped flinching. That alone unsettled him more than any confrontation ever could. People like my husband thrived on two things: control and ignorance. The moment he sensed he no longer had either, His confidence began to rot from the inside out. The first visible crack came 3 days after the message. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Silence, when used correctly, is louder than threats. That afternoon, while I was in my office reviewing contracts, my phone buzzed again. Same number. Please, just 5 minutes. Still nothing from me. By evening, the panic escalated. My husband came home unusually early. His steps were too quick, his voice too careful. He kissed my cheek, something he hadn't done spontaneously in months, and asked if we could have dinner together. I canceled plans, he said. I looked up from my tablet. That's rare. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. At the table, he talked too much. About work. About stress. About how complicated life had become. He watched my face the entire time, searching for cracks, for emotion, for proof that I was still the woman he thought he knew. I gave him none. When he finally paused, he cleared his throat. Someone reached out to you today. I didn't pretend confusion. I didn't confirm anything either. Oh, I said mildly. His fingers tightened around his glass. She's upset. Said you didn't respond. I met his eyes then, really met them, and smiled softly. I get a lot of messages. That was when fear crossed his face for the first time without disguise. That night, he didn't sleep. I could feel it in the way his body stayed tense beside mine, in the shallow breaths, in the way he reached for his phone again, and then stopped himself. I slept perfectly. The next morning, I finally replied. Tomorrow. Public place. Bring honesty. No punctuation. No warmth. Within seconds, 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Thank you. I chose a cafe she wouldn't expect. Bright, busy, glass walls on all sides. No corners to hide in. No shadows to cling to. She arrived early. I watched her from across the street before going in. She sat rigidly, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. Her foot bounced, non-stop, beneath the table. She looked smaller than I remembered. Frayed. Fear ages people faster than guilt. When I walked in, she stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Thank you for meeting me, she said too quickly. I gestured for her to sit. Relax. We're not here to make a scene. Her eyes darted around anyway. We sat in silence for nearly a full minute before she broke. He told me you didn't know. I stirred my coffee slowly. People say a lot of things when they want something. Her voice trembled. He said you were busy, that you didn't notice, that you wouldn't care. I finally looked at her, really looked. Which part did you believe? I asked. She swallowed hard. Then came the flood. Excuses, rationalizations, half-confessions wrapped in self-pity. She talked about loneliness, misunderstanding, timing, about how it just happened, about how it was never supposed to hurt anyone. I let her talk. When she finished, she looked at me with wet eyes and whispered, "What do you want?" That question revealed everything. I leaned back. The truth. She shook her head. I'm telling you. No, I interrupted calmly. You're telling me what you rehearsed. I want what you haven't said. Her hands started shaking. Finally, in a voice barely audible, she admitted the one thing that mattered most. Something he had promised her. Something he had planned. Something he had never told me. I thanked her for her honesty. She stared at me, confused. That's it. For now, I said, standing. One more thing. She looked up. If anyone asks, you reached out to me, not the other way around. Her face drained of color. I left without another word. By the time I got home, my husband was already waiting. He tried to act casual. Failed. Did you talk? He asked. Yes. And I placed my bag down carefully, removed my coat, and looked at him. She told me everything. The room went very still. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, argue, perform outrage. Instead, he slumped slightly, like a man who realizes the storm has already passed through and taken the roof with it. I never meant. I know, I said. That's the problem. That night, I moved into the guest room. Not dramatically, not angrily. I simply took a pillow and closed a door. The message was clear: access revoked. Over the next 2 weeks, consequences arrived quietly, one after another. His work situation worsened. Projects stalled. Meetings grew tense. People watched him differently now, measuring, questioning. At home, the silence stretched. He tried kindness, then guilt, then irritation, then desperation. Nothing worked. I had already stepped out of the role he needed me to play. Meanwhile, I finalized paperwork, signed documents, set timelines. I wasn't preparing for an ending. I was preparing for exposure. The final straw came when he tried to rush me. I think we should talk about fixing this, he said one evening, voice tight, before things get out of hand. I smiled. They already are, I replied. Just not for me. He didn't understand yet, but he would. Soon. Something irreversible was coming. They just didn't know when, or how devastating it would be. And that uncertainty? That was my greatest leverage. I understood something crucial that morning. If I stayed emotional, I would lose. If I stayed quiet, observant, and precise, everything would come to me on its own. So I became patient. Patience isn't passive. It's active restraint. It's watching someone walk confidently toward a cliff without warning them there's no ground ahead. My husband mistook my calm for weakness. That was his final miscalculation. He started trying to reclaim control in small ways. Little tests, subtle manipulations. He would forget to tell me things, then watch my reaction. He would bring up money casually, hinting at shared obligations, shared futures. He even tried nostalgia once, pulled out an old photo from our early years, laughing softly as if we were still those people. I didn't engage. I answered politely, briefly, neutrally. It unnerved him. People who lie for a living depend on emotional feedback. They need anger to deflect, tears to exploit, forgiveness to reset the cycle. When you give them nothing, they panic. That panic started leaking into his routines. He slept less, ate irregularly, checked his phone obsessively. I noticed him deleting call logs even when he thought I wasn't watching. Once, I caught him pacing the balcony at 2 a.m, whispering harshly into the darkness. I didn't ask who he was talking to. I already knew. Meanwhile, I moved quietly. I met with my lawyer during lunch breaks, never on the same day or at the same place twice. I reviewed accounts he thought I'd never check. I traced patterns he assumed were invisible. Money leaves fingerprints. So do lies. The more I looked, the clearer it became. What I had discovered was only the surface. There were transfers that didn't make sense, expenses that didn't align with his salary, commitments he never mentioned. I didn't confront him. I documented everything. One evening, he came home carrying takeout and force cheer. He laid the food out neatly, poured wine, even lit a candle, something he hadn't done in years. I miss us, he said. I looked at him across the table. Which version? He flinched. What does that mean? It means, I said calmly, you're talking to me like I'm someone you remember. I'm not. Silence followed. Then frustration broke through his mask. You're acting like I've already been sentenced. I took a sip of water. People usually feel that way when they know the verdict won't favor them. His jaw tightened. You think you're so clever. I smiled slightly. No, I think you underestimated how observant I've always been. That night, he didn't touch me. He didn't even try. Instead, he watched me like a stranger sharing his space. The next escalation came faster than I expected. A mutual acquaintance called me casually one afternoon, her tone too careful to be innocent. I ran into your husband, she said. He seemed stressed. I hummed in acknowledgement. He mentioned you two were going through a rough patch. Of course he did. I said nothing. She hesitated. He said, you've been distant. that you've been distracted by work. I smiled into the phone. That's interesting. Why? Because I haven't told anyone that. There was a pause on the line. Then she changed the subject too quickly. That confirmed it. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was preparing a narrative. That's when I accelerated. I stopped shielding him. Not publicly. Not yet. But I stopped correcting assumptions. Stopped defending his absence. Stopped smoothing over his inconsistencies. When people asked how things were, I answered honestly, but selectively. We're adjusting, I'd say. Some truths take time to surface. Not everything is what it looks like from the outside. I watched how those words traveled. I watched who repeated them. And I watched who warned him. He confronted me about it one night, voice tight with accusation. You're letting people think things. I met his gaze evenly. I'm letting people think for themselves. That's dangerous. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. Then came the mistake that changed everything. He tried to rush me into reconciliation. He booked a weekend trip without asking, packed a bag for me, left it by the door like a demand disguised as romance. We need to reset, he said. Get away. Fix this before it gets worse. I looked at the bag, then at him. You're trying to run out the clock, I said. He laughed nervously. That's not fair. It's accurate. He lost his temper then. Really lost it. You think you can just freeze me out forever? You think you hold all the cards. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. No, I said softly. I think you've already played yours. The look on his face told me he finally understood something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, while he slept or pretended to, I unlocked his phone. Not for messages, for confirmations. What I found wasn't just betrayal. It was coordination, planning, assumptions made about my ignorance, about my loyalty, about my silence. I copied everything. Then I put the phone back exactly where it had been. The next morning, I made him breakfast. That confused him more than anger ever could. As he ate, I watched him carefully and said casually, Do you believe secrets stay buried forever? He froze mid-bite. What kind of question is that? The kind you should answer honestly. He forced a laugh. You're being dramatic. I smiled. You're being careless. That was the moment fear replaced arrogance in his eyes. Not panic yet. Fear. And fear makes people sloppy. He was reacting. I was deciding. He was watching his footing. I was choosing when to push. And what he still didn't understand, what none of them understood yet, was this. I wasn't gathering evidence to hurt him. I was gathering it so he couldn't hurt me ever again. And the next move would make that very clear. By then, I had learned how silence could reshape a person. My husband no longer argued. He negotiated. Every word he spoke was measured now, calculated to test where I stood without revealing how far he had already fallen. He asked neutral questions. He watched my reactions the way gamblers watch dice. He waited for tells that never came. I gave him none. What I gave him instead was normalcy, cold, efficient normalcy. I went to work on time. I came home on time. I cooked simple meals. I answered messages politely. I lived beside him like a calm stranger who knew exactly how the story would end, but was in no rush to announce the final page. That unnerved him more than any confrontation ever could. People expect rage. They expect tears. They expect begging or threats. They do not expect quiet certainty. He started making mistakes. Small ones at first. He forgot which version of a story he'd told me. He contradicted himself about dates, about expenses, about meetings that never existed. Once, he mentioned a conversation I knew for a fact had never happened. When I raised an eyebrow, not accusing, just curious, his entire posture stiffened. From that moment on, he began over-explaining everything. And over-explanation is panic in disguise. Meanwhile, I continued building something invisible. Every document I gathered, every timestamp I saved, every inconsistency I logged. None of it was fueled by anger anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. This was colder, methodical, durable. I wasn't reacting to betrayal. I was responding to exposure. The turning point came on a Wednesday evening. I remember because it was raining again, just like the night I came home early from my trip. The same soft drizzle, the same reflective streets. As if the city itself had decided to mirror the loop he thought he could repeat forever. He came home late, too late to pretend it was work. I was sitting at the table, laptop closed, tea untouched, waiting. Not anxiously, intentionally. "You didn't text," I said calmly. He hesitated just long enough to betray himself. I lost track of time. I nodded. "That happens when you're busy lying." The words landed quietly, but the effect was immediate. His face drained. Not because he'd been accused, but because I'd stopped pretending. "You know?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I've known for a while," I replied. He sank into the chair across from me, hands gripping the edge of the table like he needed something solid to hold onto. "How much?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly. "Enough." That was when he broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. He started explaining, as if explanation could undo intent, as if details could soften damage, as if confession meant absolution. He talked about stress, about feeling invisible, about ego, about temptation, about how it wasn't planned, about how it got out of hand, about how it meant nothing. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finally ran out of words, I spoke. "You didn't just betray me," I said evenly. "You replaced me. You planned a future that didn't include me, while living off the life I built." He shook his head desperately. "That's not true." "It is," I said, "and the proof isn't emotional. It's documented. Financial, digital, chronological." That was when panic finally arrived. His breathing changed. His hands trembled. His eyes darted, calculating exits that no longer existed. "What do you want?" he asked. The same question she had asked me, and it told me everything. "I want you to stop lying," I said. "To me, to yourself, to everyone." "I can fix this," he insisted. "I'll lend it. I'll do anything." I stood. "You already did everything," I said quietly. "That's the problem." That night, I didn't sleep beside him. I packed a bag, not because I was leaving, but because I needed space to think clearly. He watched me from the doorway, hollow-eyed, finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless. "Please," he said, "don't do this." I looked at him one last time before closing the door. "I didn't," I replied. "You did." The days that followed were surreal. He flooded my phone with messages, apologies, promises, justifications, panic. I read them without responding. Silence had become my strongest language. I stayed with a friend, someone who didn't ask questions, someone who understood that sometimes survival looks like distance. During that time, I finalized decisions, not emotional ones, legal ones. I initiated processes he didn't expect, consultations he didn't know about, safeguards he assumed I was too trusting to ever install. He tried to intercept. He showed up at my workplace once unannounced. Security stopped him at reception. The look of humiliation on his face, being escorted out like a stranger, told me everything I needed to know. He was unraveling, and unraveling people make dangerous choices. That's when I decided to end the waiting. I invited him to meet me. Public place, midday, neutral ground. He arrived early, eyes sunken, hands restless. When he saw me, relief flickered, briefly, before being replaced by dread. I sat across from him and placed a folder on the table. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to inform you." He swallowed hard. "What's that?" "A summary," I replied, "of what happens next." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. "You have two options," I continued calmly. One preserves what little dignity you have left. The other dismantles everything you've built. He stared at the folder like it might explode. What's in it? He asked. Truth, I said. And timelines. His voice cracked. You wouldn't. I met his eyes. I already have. That was when he understood something crucial. This was no longer a personal conflict. It was a controlled collapse. And I was the one holding the release valve. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I wasn't emotional. He knew I was finished protecting him. And for the first time since I had walked into that bedroom weeks ago and seen my life shatter, I felt steady. Not vindictive. Not cruel. Just clear. The kind of clarity that comes right before everything changes forever. Not because of what I planned to say or do, but because of what would finally become visible to everyone else. Up until now, the damage had lived in private spaces. Bedrooms. Phones. Accounts. Quiet conversations behind closed doors. But secrets don't survive daylight. They rot when exposed, and rot spreads fast. The morning after our meeting, he didn't go to work. That alone told me everything. People like him cling to routine when they think they still have control. The moment routine breaks, it means the ground beneath them has shifted. I woke early, calm in a way that surprised even me. There was no shaking, no dread. Just focus. I went back to the house. Not to reconcile, to reclaim. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, still in yesterday's clothes, staring into a cold cup of coffee like it might explain what was happening to his life. You're here, he said quietly. So am I replied, setting my bag down. That's the difference. He looked up. His eyes were red, hollow. Fear had settled into him now, not panic, not denial. Fear with weight. Fear that understands consequences. We need to talk, he said. We already did, I answered, opening my laptop. Today I'm executing. That word hit him harder than anything else I'd said before. Executing. I began methodically. I changed passwords. Not dramatically, just efficiently. Accounts I'd always technically shared but practically controlled. Cloud access. Financial dashboards. Administrative permissions he'd never bothered to learn because he assumed he never needed to. I watched realization dawn slowly on his face. You're locking me out, he said. No, I corrected. I'm restoring boundaries. He stood abruptly. You can't just. I can, I said, finally looking at him. And I already have. His phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then again. He checked it. His face tightened. Is something wrong? I asked pleasantly. My manager wants to talk, he muttered. I nodded. They usually do when irregularities surface. That was the moment terror finally replaced fear. What did you do? He demanded. I closed my laptop and folded my hands. I stopped intercepting consequences. For years, I had smoothed things over for him without even realizing it. Covered gaps. Explained inconsistencies. Redirected questions. Protected his image because I believed it was tied to our future. I had withdrawn that protection. That afternoon, the calls escalated. First HR, then finance, then a number he didn't recognize, but I did. He paced the living room, sweating, snapping at every vibration. Say something, he pleaded. Tell me what you want. I stood, walked past him, and opened the window. I want you to sit down, I said calmly, before you embarrass yourself further. He obeyed. That alone told me how far the power had shifted. By evening, the house felt smaller, tighter, like it couldn't contain the truth anymore. Then came the knock. Firm, official, final. He froze. I opened the door. Two men stood there, professional and polite, holding folders and badges that didn't need explanation. Are you? One began. I am, he said. And he's inside. My husband stood, slowly, face ashen. They asked questions. He answered poorly. They asked for documents. I provided them. He watched me hand over copies he'd never known existed. That night, After they left, he collapsed onto the couch like a man who had aged decades in hours. "You destroyed me," he whispered. I looked at him with something close to pity. "No," I said. "You built this. I just stopped holding it up." The fallout didn't stay contained. It never does. Within days, whispers became conversations. Conversations became confirmations. His name began circulating, not with admiration, but with caution. People stopped returning his calls. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Friends became unavailable. Even family, his own, started asking questions he couldn't answer without lying. And lies collapse under pressure. He tried one last tactic. Sympathy. He cried, not dramatically, not convincingly, but with desperation. "I made mistakes," he said one night. "Does that mean I deserve to lose everything?" I thought carefully before responding. "No," I said. "You deserve to lose what you took, dishonestly. The rest you already gave away." He stared at me, stunned. "I loved you," he said. I believed him. In his way. But love without respect is just possession with sentiment attached. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm still standing." The next call I made changed someone else's life forever. My brother. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I asked him one question. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Then listen carefully," I replied, "and don't interrupt." I told him everything. Not emotionally. Factually. Timeline. Evidence. Context. Silence filled the line for a long time. Then his voice broke. "I need to see it," he said. "I know," I replied. "Come tomorrow." When he arrived, he looked like a man bracing for impact. I didn't soften the truth. I showed him the recordings, the messages, the transfers, the lies. He didn't cry at first. He went very still, then very quiet. Then he stood up and walked outside. I didn't follow. Some reckonings must be faced alone. When he came back in, his eyes were different, older, sharper. "Thank you," he said, "for not lying to me." "I would never," I replied. That night he made his own decisions. I didn't influence them. I didn't need to. Truth does its own work. The lies had nowhere left to hide. The people who had benefited from my silence now faced the cost of it. And I understood something profound. This wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. I had carried too much for too long. Now, everyone was carrying their own weight. And for the first time since that night, I came home early. I could finally breathe. Not because I pushed harder, but because everyone finally saw what had been hidden for years. The morning after my brother left, the house felt empty in a way it never had before. Not quiet, empty, like the walls themselves had stopped pretending. I woke before dawn, dressed carefully, and packed a single box. Just one. I didn't need more. Everything else could wait, or stay behind. When he finally emerged from the bedroom, he looked smaller. Not physically, emotionally, as if gravity had increased overnight. "You're leaving," he said. "I'm relocating," I corrected. "There's a difference." He watched me tape the box shut with trembling hands. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Somewhere I'm not expected to bleed quietly," I said. He flinched. I carried the box to the door, paused, then turned back, not out of hesitation, but closure. "You should know something," I said. "The silence you enjoyed for years, it wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And discipline ends when it's no longer respected." He tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. "Can we talk later?" he whispered. I shook my head gently. "You're about to do a lot of talking. Just not to me." And with that, I walked out. The next phase unfolded without theatrics. No shouting. No confrontations in hallways. Just paperwork, meetings, and consequences delivered by people who had no emotional attachment to him, and therefore no patience. His suspension became termination. Termination became investigation. Investigation became isolation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I watched with a steady calm I'd earned. What surprised me wasn't how quickly things fell apart. It was how many people had known. Former colleagues reached out, some cautiously, some guiltily. I always wondered. I didn't think it was my place. I assumed you were aware. Awareness, I learned, is often mistaken for consent. Meanwhile, my brother disappeared for days. I didn't chase him. I trusted him. When he finally called, his voice was raw but steady. I filed, he said. I exhaled slowly. Good. She denied everything at first, he continued. Then changed tactics. Then cried. Then blamed you. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. She asked if you planned this, he said. And what did you say? That no one plans to be betrayed, he replied. But some people plan to survive it. I smiled for the first time in days. The confrontation between them had been brutal, not violent but devastating. Years of trust collapsed in minutes. Every excuse she'd rehearsed crumbled under facts she couldn't explain away. The pregnancy, the timeline, the messages, the money. There was no villain monologue, no dramatic confession, just the quiet horror of realization. He left that house the same way I had left mine, carrying less than he arrived with. The ripple effects widened. Her parents called. His friends distanced themselves. Her workplace grew colder. People don't like proximity to scandal, not because they fear injustice, but because they fear reflection. As for him, the man who had once believed himself untouchable, he entered the bargaining phase. First with lawyers, then with family, then finally with me. He showed up unannounced at my temporary apartment one evening, looking thinner, paler, stripped of confidence. I'll sign whatever you want, he said immediately. Just stop this. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. Stop what? This, he gestured vaguely. Everything. You're confusing me with the cause, I said calmly. I'm just the witness. He sank into a chair. I don't recognize my life anymore, he muttered. That's because you were living on borrowed integrity, I replied. Eventually it's recalled. He looked up, desperate. You could help me. I shook my head. I already did. For years. This is what happens when help runs out. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, he asked, Do you hate me? I considered the question carefully. No, I said honestly. I hate the version of myself that tolerated you. That answer ended the conversation. The legal process moved faster than he expected. Evidence does that. So does preparation. Assets were frozen. Accounts examined. Timelines reconstructed. He was advised, firmly, not to contest. He complied. Publicly, I remained quiet. Privately, I reclaimed everything. My work. My name. My sleep. I moved again, not out of fear, but intention. A small place with light and silence. A space that belonged only to me. My brother began rebuilding too. Slowly, painfully, but honestly. Some nights we sat in silence together, not to relive the past, but to remind ourselves we were no longer trapped in it. One evening he looked at me and said, I don't know how you stayed standing. I answered without hesitation, because if I fell, they would have stood taller. That was the truth. Lives rearranged, masks discarded, illusions shattered, and somewhere beneath the wreckage, something solid remained. Not love, not forgiveness, but something far more powerful, self-respect. And once you reclaim that, nothing can take it from you again. By the time the formal notices arrived, I was no longer living in reaction mode. That phase had ended quietly, without ceremony, somewhere between packing that single box and watching my brother walk out of a house that no longer recognized him. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning, thick, official, heavy with finality. I didn't rush to open it. Instead, I brewed coffee, sat by the window, watched the city wake up the way it always did, unbothered by personal collapses. Cars moved. People laughed on sidewalks. Somewhere, someone was celebrating something new. Only then did I tear the seal. Suspension had become termination. Termination had become inquiry. Inquiry had become a full audit. Not rumors, not gossip, documents, signatures, dates, numbers that didn't lie. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back inside the envelope, not because I intended to keep it, but because I refused to let it wrinkle my peace. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "They're cooperating," she said, "which means they're scared." I smiled faintly. Fear is honest. Fear tells the truth long before words do. "What about the assets?" I asked. "Frozen, pending review. You're protected." Protected. The word felt unfamiliar. For years, I'd been the one doing the protecting, absorbing shocks, smoothing surfaces, making everything appear intact. Now the structure held without me, and that changed everything. The next call came from my brother. He sounded different, quieter, not broken, clarified. "I moved out," he said. "Completely." I closed my eyes. "Good. I didn't take much," he added. "Just what was mine." "That's enough," I said. "It always is." He hesitated. "She keeps calling." "You don't have to answer." "I know," he replied, "but hearing her voice helps." "Helps what?" "Helps me remember I didn't imagine it," he said. "That this wasn't some misunderstanding I'll regret walking away from." I understood that need intimately. Truth feels unreal at first, like a story someone else is telling about your life. "You didn't imagine it," I said gently, "and you won't regret leaving a lie." There was a pause. Then he exhaled. "Thank you," he said, "for not stopping me." "I never would have," I replied. "This was your exit to take." After the call, I sat in silence for a long time, because beneath everything, anger, clarity, resolve, there was grief. Not for the man I lost, but for the woman I had been while standing beside him. She had loved earnestly, worked relentlessly, believed explanations she shouldn't have had to question, and she deserved acknowledgement. So that night, I opened a notebook and wrote her a letter. Not forgiving, not condemning, just honoring. I slept better after that. Days passed, then weeks. The investigation became public enough to ripple, but quiet enough to avoid spectacle. People love scandals, but institutions prefer discretion. He tried once more to reach me, not directly, through a mutual acquaintance. "I just want to explain," the message read. I didn't respond. Explanations are for misunderstandings. This was a decision. Meanwhile, consequences unfolded elsewhere. Her story fractured quickly. The pregnancy announcement that had once felt like leverage now became scrutiny. Timelines questioned. Smiles examined. Whispers sharpened. People don't forgive easily when they feel manipulated, and she had underestimated that. Her parents called my brother. Apologies first. Questions next. Then silence. He told me about it one evening while we shared takeout on my balcony. "I don't feel victorious," he admitted. "I just feel awake." "That's the part no one talks about," I said. "Awareness isn't loud. It's heavy." He nodded. "But it gets lighter," I added, "when you stop carrying other people's secrets." He believed me. I could tell. As for him, the man who once laughed easily, dismissed concerns casually, and moved through life assuming it would bend around him, he began shrinking in the world's eyes. Not dramatically, gradually. Friends stopped calling. Invitations vanished. Doors closed without explanation. Status is fragile when it's built on perception instead of integrity. And perception had shifted. One evening I saw him by accident, at a cafe near my office. He was seated alone, hunched over a phone that no longer buzzed the way it used to. For a brief moment he looked up. Our eyes met. Time slowed, not because of longing but recognition. He looked surprised, then ashamed, then hopeful. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply nodded once. Not in greeting. In closure. He dropped his gaze. I walked past him without breaking stride. Later that night, I realized something important. I hadn't rehearsed that moment. I hadn't imagined what I'd say or how I'd feel. And yet, when it arrived, my body knew exactly what to do. That's how you know you've healed past the need for validation. The legal process concluded quietly. Terms agreed. Signatures placed. Assets divided cleanly. No drawn-out drama. No courtroom theatrics. Just an ending. My lawyer congratulated me. "You handled this with remarkable restraint," she said. "I didn't restrain anything," I replied. "I redirected it." She smiled. My brother finalized his separation soon after. He moved into a modest place closer to work. Started running again. Smiling more. Some nights we cooked together and talked about anything but the past. Other nights we talked about everything. Neither felt wrong anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in amber, he asked me something unexpected. "Do you think people like them ever change?" I considered it carefully. "I think they regret outcomes," I said. "But change requires accountability, and accountability requires humility." He nodded slowly. "Then I hope they find it," he said. I admired that. Not forgiveness, but release. As for me, opportunities returned. Not as compensation, as continuation. Projects I had once postponed resurfaced. Invitations arrived, not because of sympathy but respect. I chose selectively, deliberately, because rebuilding isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about choosing what deserves space next. This was no longer a story about betrayal. It was about aftermath, about quiet reckonings, about the strange, steady power of walking away without burning everything behind you. Not because they deserved mercy, but because I deserved peace. And that peace, earned, not gifted, settled into my life like something permanent, something no one could miscount, something no one could take away. If my story stayed with you, take a moment to support it. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And if you believe quiet strength is more powerful than loud anger, stay with us. There are more stories ahead that prove walking away can be the strongest move of all.